Welcome to PwC's What's Next in Cyber podcast series from our Cyber and Privacy Innovation Institute. I'm Jane Allen. I'm a principal in PwC's Cybersecurity, Privacy, and Forensics practice, and I get to be your moderator today for today's episode. We'll be gathering some real-time intel from my colleagues, our subject matter specialists, on finding the right balance between secure transformation and cost optimization. Many of our clients are dealing with this dilemma right now. Joining me today remotely, all of us from our homes, will be Joe Nacera, PwC Cyber and Privacy Innovation Institute leader. Hi, Joe.
Good morning.
And Jim Fox, a principal in our Cyber Privacy and Forensics practice as well. Hi, Jim.
Hi.
How are you both doing today?
Doing great. Happy to be here.
Excellent.
Good. So, Jim, maybe I'll start with you. In all the discussions you're having with clients right now, especially at this point in time, what are they most worried about? What's keeping them up at night with this dilemma?
Contrary to a lot of other areas where people are really pulling back, cyber spend is still happening. More than half of organizations from our Global Digital Trust Insight Survey said they're spending more on cyber this year than last year. And this is really new information, so it's not something that was done pre-COVID. But when you double click on that and you go to the next level, what there is concern about is, are they spending the money in the right places and are they getting the return on investment? So harder questions are being asked around how they're using these funds and how they're spending these funds, because frankly, the risk environment is getting worse. And they can't continually just throw money at the problem. So you're starting to see questions that said, show me that you're actually spending your budget where it belongs. Show me that you understand where you're actually going to help the business and support the business the most, and instead of just driving and growing the overall budget. So that's a different theme, and a lot of CISOs haven't really had to deal with that before. They're having to literally put this and rationalize and demonstrate that they're spending the money in the right place. So that's new for them, something all executives in regular corporate world have had to deal with every year when they're trying to get their budgets.
So Joe, in all your travels speaking with clients, what are you observing to be the common pitfalls that you see when faced with this, frankly, cost reduction mandate?
Sure. I think the first pitfall that I see is really a focus on looking at the biggest line item in the budget. And certainly it makes some sense to assess the areas where you can have the greatest impact. But likely the thing that has the biggest allocation in the budget is the thing that's mitigating the most risk. And so I think the first mistake we see is that knee-jerk reaction of, I'm going to go to the big line items and I'm going to try to cut there. We really encourage our clients to take a risk-based approach where they understand what risks are most likely and most impactful and make sure that they're allocating their limited funds to protect those most critical risks first. I think the second thing that we've seen is reducing expenditures doesn't always equate to reducing your risk posture or to increasing your risks, frankly. There are things you can do to really deliver the same risk mitigation at a lower cost if you get more efficient. And so some of those efficiencies that we're seeing is technology rationalization, really looking at the tech stack that they have and making sure that they are not having duplicative spend in similar technologies. I think secondarily, it's really looking at their sourcing strategy of how they're sourcing talent. They're potentially outsourcing certain capabilities at a lower cost per unit. And they're looking at labor arbitrage. They're looking to move certain capabilities to lower cost markets, whether that be onshore markets and just cities where the cost of living is potentially less, or in some cases even global sourcing strategies.
To that end, Jim, maybe I'll pose this question to you then. What's the best approach for companies then to think about how to prioritize their spend, especially in a backdrop of when risks keep evolving right in front of us for many clients especially? How do they do that?
So I think you start off, as Joe spoke, you until you really understand your threat and your risk environment, in other words, and I mean to the business, until you understand what the cyber threats are to the business and can say, okay, if these things happen, this is going to impact us. And what those threats are different now because the way you're doing operations and delivery are different because you have people that are working from places they never worked before, et cetera. So the first thing before you do anything is make sure you understand that threat environment and the scenarios and the systems that are most at risk. If you do that, then you take the we call them the levers, and Joe mentioned the big ones. Your tools, how you organize your operations, your process, where you're pulling resources from, where you're finding your people. You can then pull all those levers and say, what can I do to, for instance, I have 3 different identity and access management platforms. I don't need 3. I don't need 3 endpoint solutions. But what I do need to do is make sure that those are deployed in the systems that are most at risk. So understand your risk and then go through every one of those things, from tools to people to process, et cetera, and prioritize what your spend is against those risk areas. And if you do that, you're going to find that you're going to get efficiencies easily of 10, 20%, even if you're a really well-run organization right off the bat. So that's the 2 pieces to do it. And Joe already articulated some of the levers that you would pull.
Then Joe, what is your advice then? Is there a way for our clients to leverage this mandate of cost reduction, but still use that as an opportunity to transform their cyber strategy, or at least align to your cyber strategy?
Yeah, I think the other aspect of this is not just focusing on the cost side, but focusing on how do you help the business return to revenue growth, right? One of the things that we've seen as a result of the pandemic is business models are changing. There's a retailer that we work with who used to have 70-80% of their revenue coming from in-store purchases. And what they've seen is really a transition to the vast majority of their revenue now being done online, right, through their digital app. And so what CISOs are doing is they're understanding how the revenue model has changed for their companies. And they're thinking about, how do I enable and how do I protect that revenue stream? And so I would say one of the mistakes that we've seen is just focusing on the cost side, when you could also focus on the way that you're actually transforming the business and how do you do that securely.
Brick to click is a great example of some of the transformations folks are trying to deal with, right? Real time with this on top of them. I guess both of you, maybe I'll go back to Jim, any key takeaways just with this environment and all the, I'll say, pressure that CISOs have on them that are quite unique right now?
3 points. The first one would be, you need to really understand where the business is going to be impacted by cyber, and then you ask yourself that question always: is this the best use of these investments? Because every problem, you're always going to have more problems than you have solutions. So you just ask yourself, what is the business impact? Every question: what is the business impact, and am I making the right investment decision? That's the first one. The second one is, we are in a much more uncertain world. So even when you pretend that you understand every threat that's going to happen to you, every risk, you have to realize you really don't. The environment changes. So you have to really look at it and say, how resilient am I for things that could happen? I didn't have to articulate them. How resilient is my system when the bad thing happens? That's the second takeaway. The third one is, so as Joe talked about, it's not just cost cutting, but there are ways to leverage automation and machine learning and all sorts of things that exist now that are really now ready for prime time, that not only are going to help you reduce your costs, but will actually make you more resilient and more effective. So you really can, as Joe said, you can actually improve your operations, improve your security, and spend less money if you really think that way.
And I would imagine that this might be a good time for I'll say, refreshed or renewed partnership that cybersecurity can have with different parts of the business and leadership, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, Jane, that's a great point.
And Joe, any key takeaways for you from this situation?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we haven't talked about that I think is really important is taking a data-driven approach to your risk management program. And so one of the things that CISOs are struggling with is, how do they get access to the right data so they can make more informed decisions? And so that means understanding the threat landscape from a data perspective, what's most likely to happen, what's the potential impact if it happens, and then also understanding the data from a business perspective. Do you know which channels are driving the most revenue for you? Do you know what components of your supply chain are those potential single points of failure? And so that notion of a data-driven risk management program is probably more critical than ever. So I would highlight that. Jim touched on a number of things around the levers that you can pull that I won't repeat.
Yeah.
And then I think the last thing, and I'll just leave this as a little tidbit, is don't forget about your research and development tax credit. Many of the cybersecurity investments that you have are available for this R&D tax credit. And one of the things that we found is that's not a category of spend that sometimes has been included by tax departments. And so if you are a CISO and you're looking for a different way to perhaps deliver some cost savings to the client, reaching out to your tax professional and having that discussion around the R&D tax credit would be another creative way to think about cost savings.
And that's really interesting. That's bridging two different disciplines, certainly, for sure, but that's wonderful. Thank you, Joe and Jim, for your time today and providing some insights in terms of what you're seeing right now with all your clients across the globe, frankly. But it's been a great discussion. I know we could probably talk a lot more, and maybe I'll pick your brains offline. But for those listening, thank you for your time. I hope you found this discussion valuable. And we'll be back soon with another episode of our podcast series of What's Next in Cyber. Thank you.
Copyright 2020 PwC. All rights reserved. PwC refers to the PwC network and/or one or more of its member firms, each of which is a separate legal entity. Please see www.pwc.com/structure for further details. This content is for general information purposes only and should not be used as a substitute for consultation with professional advisors.